And here is Sir William Slim, Field Marshal, British 14th Army that he led in Burma, commenting on his experiences. If 500 Japanese were ordered to hold a position, we had to kill 495, last 5 committed suicide before we could take the place. And it was this combination of obedience and ferocity that made the Japanese so formidable. Okay, this brings me to another value that's emphasized in Bushido, willpower, back to Yamamoto. There is nothing that cannot be done. The way of the samurai is in desperateness. Simply become insane and desperate, and it'll somehow work out for you. And one can accomplish any feat. Think of Pearl Harbor. And this emphasis on willpower and just trying harder, it denigrates strategy. And here you see a picture of the supreme example of honor and loyalty and willpower in the kamikaze pilots. But if this is what you're doing, you're denigrating strategy. And here, Yamamoto's me talking about tactics, but it has operational and strategic implications. He says, learning such things as military tactics is useless. The way of the samurai is one of immediacy, and it is best to dash in headlong. If one were informed of military tactics, he would have many doubts. So the idea is, if you think about these things in peacetime, you'll start hesitating in wartime. It won't work out for you if you do this. During times of peace, when listening to the stories of battle, we should never say, in facing such a situation, what would a person do? Well, so much for my job at the Naval War College. So much for the case studies. No matter what the circumstances might be, one should be of the mind to win. One should be holding the first spear to strike. So here's the implications if you believe this. What you're doing, it's a very unanalytical way to approach wars. It's all about whatever it is you want, you just steal the will and go for it, and somehow you'll get it if you want. There's a lack of grand strategy. What's grand strategy? It's integrating all the instruments of national power, not just the army or the army and the navy, which is what the Japanese are trying to do, but all instruments of national power in pursuit of, if the bigger aim is to stabilize China and keep the communists out, there ought to be some diplomacy and some other things going on. But that's not what's happening. In the samurai literature, it's a focus on the military instrument exclusively. So I'll give you an example of how this works out. Before the Imperial Japanese Army and the Imperial Japanese Navy invaded French Indochina, neither one of them did a little study saying, hey, if we do that, let's check the other side of the tennis court net and see what other people, how they might react. They just steal the will and march right in. Okay, that triggered the U.S. 100% oil embargo. That's a problem. Operational success, strategic mess. So it is this focusing on just the operational level is it's the basis for this ill-founded optimism with which the Japanese just took territory after territory without saying, hey, what about the cost of actually occupying these places? And, oh, we're going for these places for resources. So maybe we ought to check it out with the finance ministry and others about how are we ever going to get these resources back home? None of that's going on. It's a disaster for them. Okay, I'm going to talk about a couple of secondary theorists. One of them is Taira Shigesuke, who is a contemporary of Yamamoto, because he provides a really concise definition of the operative values of samurai culture. Only 3 things are considered essential: loyalty, duty, and valor. So steadfastly loyal in battle as to disregard his own life. What he's actually talking about is group loyalty. In the West, the basic unit composing society is the individual. Well, in the East, it's the group, and group interests take primacy over individual interests. And for the Japanese society is divided by in-groups and out-groups. The most basic in-group, biggest overarching one, is the Japanese people vis-a-vis everybody else. But within Japan, everybody comes from a different province, a different locality. They go to different educational institutes. They graduate from different kindergarten classes, I kid you not, and college classes. If they work for different companies or they work for or they're in the military, they're in different branches. And you also have family loyalties. And you owe each of these nested and overlapping groups different obligations. And sometimes these obligations conflict. And if the conflict's really awful, that's another reason for committing suicide. And then if you look at the Japanese language, the moment a person opens their mouth to speak to another Japanese, you can immediately listen to the grammatical forms that are being used, the specific word choices to know what's the degree of hierarchy, like where do they sit in this unequal hierarchy, and whether it's in-group, out-group. So everybody feels, or most people feel, some level of group loyalty. This is human. But in Japan, it's the levels of membership are much more finely calibrated, and they're re-emphasized by these social, cultural, and linguistic reasons. So this group membership and stovepiping ultimately is going to be a much stronger feature of Japanese culture than some other places.